Okay, we are back, and here's your unchoice in terms of choosing the next video that you're gonna play. So I gave you an overview of choice poetic, some of the motivation behind it. You can look at the paper and examples in the paper, particularly in choice poetics by example paper, to see how to analyze specific choices. I'll go over a couple of examples that are in the paper to give you an idea of how to go about analyzing choices. So let's start with Mass Effect. Mass Effect is a good example across the series of really nicely designed narrative with sufficient agency to navigate through choices. So I'm going to start with a video where you will see 3 different playthroughs that are overlaid in one video, and you can see how some of the choices lead to the same outcome.
The Geth attack is a matter of some concern, but there is nothing to indicate Saren was involved in any way.
The investigation by Citadel Security turned up no evidence to support your charge of treason.
An eyewitness saw him kill Nihilus in cold blood.
We've read the Eden Prime reports, Ambassador. The testimony of one traumatized dock worker is hardly compelling proof.
I resent these accusations. Nihilus was a fellow Spectre and a friend.
That just let you catch him off guard.
Captain Anderson, you always seem to be involved when humanity makes false charges against me. And this must be your protege, Commander Shepard, the one who let the beacon get destroyed.
The mission to Eden Prime is top secret. The only way you could know about the beacon was if you were there.
With Nihilus and all his files passed on to me, I read the Eden Prime report. I was unimpressed. But what can you expect? From a human.
Saren despises humanity.
The next time.
That's why he attacked Eden Prime.
Your species needs to learn its place, Shepard. You're not ready to join the Council. You're not even ready to join the Spectres. He has no right to say that. That's not his decision.
Shepard's admission into the Spectres is not the purpose of this meeting.
This meeting has no purpose. The humans are wasting your time, Counselor, and mine.
You can't analyze Council's position as a Spectre. You need to open your eyes.
What we need is evidence. So far, we've seen nothing.
There is still one outstanding issue. Commander Shepard's vision. It may have been triggered by the beacon.
Are we allowing dreams into evidence now? How can I defend my innocence against this kind of testimony?
I agree. Our judgment must be based on facts and evidence, not wild imaginings and reckless speculation.
Do you have anything else to add, Commander Shepard?
You've made your decision. I won't waste my breath.
The Council has found no evidence of any connection between Saren and the Geth. Ambassador, your petition to have him disbarred from the Spectres is denied.
I'm glad to see justice was served.
This meeting is adjourned.
So as you can see there, there are a number of choice points that you saw, and some of them led to different outcomes, and others the same outcome. So here, where there are a number of choices that you make. In this case, what's interesting is that these choices serve as points at which, if you know a little bit about the Mass Effect control scheme, where the positioning of these choices was very important. So they aligned with a certain point of view. So even when players got to these points where they were presented with choices that led to the same outcome, they still ended up role playing and choosing the option that aligned with their position in terms of actual placement. And in this case, this is an example of where it is useful to have some of these choices still presented because of the way they are played out, even though the eventual outcome of the entire scene does not change. There are also other more practical reasons for adding false choices. These are simply constraints related to design and development, where the more choices you add, the broader the narrative gets and the harder it is to constrain, both in terms of time of developing new material as your narratives diverge, and constraints for developing. So in this case, the way you would start out by doing your analysis is to start with players' goals. So in this case, what could your players' goals be? Save the galaxy, become powerful, pursue romance, protect your crew, and solve the mystery. But also, these are all what we call diegetic goals, which is that these are goals that the player character has. The player at a meta level might also have goals. To beat the game, to explore all the options, acting out the story, critique the design, showing off to your friend specific parts of gameplay. And so these are what we will call extra diegetic. So diegetic is a term that comes from narrative theory. That means inside the story, or part of the story. Extra diegetic are things that are outside the story. So if you look at one of these, so for example, acting out a story, then you say, okay, for that particular goal, what outcomes are suggested, what impacts do they have, and what were the actual outcomes in the game. So in this case, there was no actual impact on diegetic goals because game variables remain unchanged as none of your choices actually impact the overall state of the game after the interaction is over. It does impact portrayal of Shepard's personality because the choices are such that they lead to a certain kind of personality expression through dialogue that you saw in a couple of places in that video. So, for example, in this selection where you say what's the point, it's this dismissive reaction rather than no, you've made your decision, I won't waste my breath. It's like, what's the point? It's useless, I won't waste my breath. Or you won't see the truth, and you've made a decision that I don't agree with, and I won't. There's no way to argue. So these three choices are ways in which three different personalities might approach the same situation. So the general takeaway is that modes of engagement and player goals are important for analyzing choices. For different goals, you can take the same choice situation, same framing, and the number of options, and you could pick different options based on different goals that the players are pursuing. They could be diegetic goals or goals that their character pursues, and they would want to role play for their characters. And as designers, you would want to guess and influence those choices. The next example is from Papers, Please. So this is a game where you act as an immigration officer and you are you're interviewing these many immigrants that you're trying to decide whether they should be allowed to enter the country or not. So in this case, there are a number of player goals. So I encourage you to play Papers, Please. This is a really interesting game for the topics that we are discussing in this class. So in this case, as a player, your you're doing your job as an immigration officer. You have to feed your family, avoid the penalty for making mistakes, which is a high goal because you are evaluated based on whether you let someone in who could harm the country once they are allowed to enter. You could also be making mistakes by preventing someone who might eventually be a good part of the society by rejecting them, and you're making these decisions very fast. But you also want to treat your travelers ethically. So you're looking at them sort of objectively and avoiding biases. The medium-term goals might be to prevent dishonest travelers from gaining entry, and sort of a low priority is to let approved travelers through. So we'll talk about another aspect of choice analysis with this example where we will look at outcomes. So what are the suggested outcomes? So we have two actions, approve, deny. So that's pretty straightforward in terms of options. But the way you evaluate what happens when you approve or deny is that for approvals, it's likely that you make a mistake and it is discovered. It's unknown whether a refugee is saved or whether a criminal gains entry at that point. And you can also, if you deny, you are likely to sort of not have a large negative outcome out of denying people. But on the other hand, you could have situations where the refugee that you denied entry ends up dying. So what impacts do these outcomes, possible outcomes, have on player goals? So the way we will analyze these choices is to say whether the action enables or threatens uncertain effects, and whether it advances or hinders the likely effects each choice. So each goal and outcome pair may have multiple labels for these. So for example, if your goal is feeding your family and you prioritize that over treating people ethically, then approvals would have threatens and hinders because you could make mistakes, whereas denying, so more denials will enable or advance your goal. Whereas for treating ethically, deny will have more likely that it threatens one of your the chance of getting the ethical treatment increases when you deny someone. So now if you say, well, this changes if we trust the applicant, right? So if we trust the applicant, then we would want to approve them. However, if the uncertainty leads to a mistake, then you might lose your job and feeding your family becomes challenging. So Papers, Please is one of these games that lets players engage with the dilemma and uncertainty directly, because it repeats the same choice over and over, and every time it's an uneasy choice, and over time, over many choices, this leads to a really interesting sort of player experience overall. So detailed analysis of choice can use interesting insight, where you will start looking at Papers, Please as a game where you get repeated dilemma choices, and that's a particular kind of game that expresses a certain experience. So those are that's sort of two small examples in these slides that we've gone through analysis, and the choice poetics by example paper goes into much more detail. So if you take this discussion that we have, and then read the paper based on that. It'll make it easier to read the paper and also map that to your own choice analysis. So I will break here again, and then we will switch to the next chapter in this lecture. So I'll see you in video 3.